Which button? Which button?
The side buttons. Left and right. There you go.
All right. All right.
Here we go.
I bet you all have no doubt heard some of the many theories and plans involved in how all the various critics think they can reduce government spending, tighten our collective belts, and focus our spending on what is important. Well, it can be said that at least they all have one thing right. We have really got to start watching how every tax dollar is spent. Today I'm going to tell you about a well-known and well-debated government expenditure whose time, I believe, has come to be made obsolete. This program spends $35 to $40 billion annually, with the monies directly on the legislation's consequences estimating into the hundreds of billions. A vast fortune is being spent every year on a government program that is showing very little in the way of progress, and hundreds of times that can be saved from other budgets by merely eliminating this one program and using the funds in a more progressive attitude where I am certain they are more badly needed. I am, of course, speaking of the popular movement towards the decriminalization of marijuana. This is a set of laws and policies we've had for a good while now that first provoked my interest many years ago. I, like many Americans nowadays, are similar to Barack Obama in the fact that we admit we did inhale. And for a good while in my past, I was frequently involved with that sort of lifestyle and associated closely with the people within and related to it. I've grown pot, smoked pot, I've gone to jail for pot. This now presents us with a credibility catch-22. I've got the experience and knowledge about this subject. Because it is what it is, my credibility must now suffer because of my experience with the subject. Understand? At any rate, in weighing the facts in instances such as this, whose credibility would you tend to trust more? Someone who's experienced the issues firsthand, in depth, and over time, with a genuine interest in finding the truth behind the rhetoric from both sides of the issue, or someone whose job it is to sit behind a desk all day making decisions based upon skewed data and alternating issue agendas. Before I risk my case on the issue of credibility, I would like to state now, and for the record, I do not condone the use of drugs of any kind and feel sorry for those who have chosen to for their happiness to rely on the use of illegal substances. But that is a choice. I feel that in the case of products such as caffeine, cigarettes, and alcohol, to name just a few, that individuals should be allowed to make for themselves with a minimal amount of government interference. I feel as though a more effective role the government could make would be as a supplier of information and resources to aid its citizens who are living in a world where such things are a fact of life. I don't expect our justice system to be perfect, but right now an exorbitantly large part of the population is now being classified as criminals. Currently, the United States has by far the largest prison population in the world, according to a USA Today article published by the AP in April 2005. 1 in every 138 U.S. residents is in prison or jail. And according to the Bureau of Prisons, in March 2001, federal drug offenders constituted 56.3% of the total federal prison population. So for every murderer, for every rapist, and for every child molester, we also incarcerate someone who has done nothing more than partake of a substance for themselves. So that's over half of all the money we spend on our justice system, from the cops on the streets, to the lawyers and judges, to probation and parole, and to the jails and prisons themselves, that we could be saving. And that's on top of the $40 billion we'd already be saving if the policy were eliminated. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely some sharks swimming around out there, definitely some people who I would say fall into the category of bad people. But for the most part, you're going to have some of those types of people in every facet of society. I feel like there's a lot of really genuinely good people out there who choose to smoke marijuana consciously without any sort of dilemma of right or wrong morally. And I just can't bring myself to think of some of those people as being the underbelly of society whose victimless crimes are atrocious enough to warrant the penalties imposed. Where I try to believe in and respect our legal system, the thought that we could lock some of these people in a cage somewhere away from society at great expense to each taxpayer for merely making a personal lifestyle decision such as that tells me there's definitely something that there can at least be improved upon. Now we have identified an issue which wastefully and inappropriately drains precious resources from our ailing economy, with many of its citizens who agree and feel the same way. That being said, one can now begin to acknowledge the far-reaching scope across the many affected departments of our government, which contributes to the magnitude of the problem. I now propose before you all the notion that the resources consumed by the United States policy of outlawing and criminalizing marijuana could be used with much greater efficiency and identifiable results in other, more needy areas of government. Opponents of such a change rely primarily on the argument of health concerns. Studies have been done for years with the end results varying from one degree to another. There is huge debate among the various doctors and scientists about just how much damage is being done to the respiratory system. But with the end results being that marijuana smoke is about as dangerous as our other legal smoking product, tobacco. And there has never been one case of marijuana overdose death. I fully agree that the inherent dangers should be well studied, well understood, and published where it can be easily accessed and even appropriately labeled so as to prevent any accidental or ignorant use. Another argument held by those who support the continued abolishment of marijuana is abuse potential. Well, whether or not marijuana is addictive is one of the topics still under large debate. A large contingency still holds firm that the notion marijuana is not physically addictive, merely mentally, habitually addictive. Meaning that if you smoke pot every day and all of a sudden you couldn't smoke it anymore, you might be depressed because you wouldn't have your habit any longer. But unlike cocaine or heroin or the #1 prescribed drug in America, the opiates, you can't die from withdrawal or system shock. As for pay for treatment of individuals undertaking treatment for marijuana abuse, don't we pay for that already? Not to mention that it costs for less to pay for preventive and treatment measures than it does to pay for the high cost of enforcing its continued ban. The one point of opponents that holds the most weight with me is the argument that by decriminalizing marijuana, we are sending the message that its use is acceptable, and that the fear that marijuana will become a gateway drug in which other drugs will ultimately be used. Well, I'm a father of 2 sons, and I honestly don't want them to smoke marijuana, or do any other types of drugs for that matter. So my protective instincts naturally rear their head when my children are involved. But the rebuttal has basically been covered in the previous parts, and has its abolishment stopped any kids from smoking it thus far? I mean, maybe, but I'm here to tell you, if kids want to get pot nowadays, it ain't hard to get a hold of, despite all of this money we're spending. Nowadays, marijuana is being seen and popularized on many TV shows, in movies, and in music by people who are both funny and charming. I think in a way that's actually making some kids think it's cool, even because it's illegal. They see these charismatic people using it all the time with little or no ill side effects. And as a parent, my job in censoring age-appropriate materials and defining just what is acceptable under what circumstances is made 10 times as easy and enforceable when I can clearly draw a line between truly dangerous illegal drugs and drugs whose real dangers lie in continued use and abuse over time. Now, many people feel that by far the most dangerous aspect of having drugs illegal is the menace of organized crime. Right now, our neighbors to the south in Mexico are engaged in what many are calling a civil war. Not a war between citizens of that country and the government, but a war between the drug lords and the police. On his first day in his new job to fight the tide of drugs in Mexico, retired General Mauro Enrique Tello Quiñones was tortured and murdered. According to CNN, he was shot 11 times, his skin was burned, his knees were broken, as were his bones in his hands and wrists. This is a retired general in charge of the fight of drugs. The Los Angeles Times, April 21st, 2009, reported that there have been 7,337 drug-related violence deaths in Mexico since January of 2007. That's shortly after the new president, Felipe Calderon, declared his war on drug traffickers. That's more fatalities than the U.S. has had in the entire Iraq war, and in far less time. These cartels are killing anyone and everyone who gets in their way of selling their drugs to Americans. And they're getting bolder and more violent every day. The same thing happened in the 1920s right here in America when we outlawed alcohol. Taxes rose due to the high cost of enforcing the ban. The money to be made on the black market was enough to fuel the birth and rise of the mob and gangsters like Al Capone. Underground bars called speakeasies popped up all over the country where it became very popular and trendy to enjoy an illegal drink. And normally honest people became moonshiners and bootleggers when they discovered it was much easier and more profitable to make a living dealing in a trade that much of society did not consider to be much of a crime as the government seemed to think it was. Eventually, the United States government was forced to repeal its decision to ban all alcohol when they realized they could never stop its production and consumption, and that the money that they were spending was being wasted on a fight they could not win. And life pretty much seemed to go back to the way it was before after that. Taxes went back down, the mob had nothing to fight over and kill people for, and those bootleggers and moonshiners, well, after alcohol became illegal, they just weren't criminals anymore. I feel that if we think about it a little, we can all make some logical comparisons of our history with some of the things I've told you all here today and see some striking similarities. I feel like the United States should again embark on a noble experiment, except this time we wouldn't be making laws to restrict what people did, but rather making laws to allow more personal freedom in an individual's life. And just like prohibition, if it doesn't work out, can't we always just change it back?